Welcome back to chapter 5. We're in the book of James. And today let's look at verse 7 through to verse 12. James chapter 5, verses 7 through to verse 12. Stop smiling. Be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Don't grumble, do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord come through, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. You know all these things, so stick with it. Verse 12, but above all, my brothers, don't swear. Do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath. But let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. Breaking this passage up into three parts, I want to give you three things to remember, three things that we can be, okay, as James sets us up for it. All of them in the arena of speech. Remember, that's a theme that James is talking about. He is talking about the way we speak, the way we talk, the way we interact with one another. He says, be patient, therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. You've got a deadline. You've got something to look forward to. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, but that's till when you need to be patient. It's not forever. It's not endless. It's not uncertain. The Lord is coming. We know that. And till then, we need to be patient. Now, something is going to happen at the time that the Lord comes. Something is going to happen when the Lord comes, so that it makes our patience worthwhile. That's what James is saying. So he says, stick with it. So number 1, verse 7, be patient. Number 2, verse 11, be steadfast. And number 3, in verse 12, be consistent. Be patient, be steadfast, and be consistent. Back to the top, being patient. He says, be patient like a farmer. A farmer sows his seed. He waits patiently. He recognizes that his work is done. He recognizes that he can't push anything to make success happen. This is the outcome of his life is not 100% in his hands. Because he is working with the Lord, he's living under the Lord's command, because he's living out God's will, he does his part, and then God will send the rain. The early rains and the late rains, both the farmer has no control over. So you learn patience best from a farmer, because he's looking for great increase, he's looking for great rewards, but it's not going to happen by anything he says and does. It's going to happen in God's time and in God's way. So he says, be patient. How are you doing with patience when it comes to working out the will of God, when it comes to life's circumstances, when it comes to fruit bearing and the timing of that fruit bearing? How are you doing with patience? Please do spend some time talking about it today. One of the things that happens when we lose patience is we start grumbling. We start grumbling. So he says, don't grumble. James is really on to us here. He says, you also be patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Verse 8, verse 9, he says, don't grumble. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. At the end, he says, so that you don't fall under condemnation. It's like as if God has freed us, forgiven us, and then we live in such a way that again our actions and our words condemn us. They point fingers back to us, saying we didn't understand what God has done for us. We don't understand God's perspective, God's sovereignty. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Take it very seriously and discuss this in your groups. So put those two things together. Number 1, be patient. What happens when you're not patient? You begin to grumble. What are the signs that you're not being patient? One of them is grumbling, whining against one another. What's he saying? He's like, when you start pointing fingers at other people, making it their fault that you haven't succeeded, making it their fault that something is going wrong in your life, or your life is not moving forward because of someone else, when your life is somebody else's fault, you've missed the track. In fact, you're just not being patient and letting the Lord work in your life. Number one, be patient. Number two, where are we? We're in verse 11, but read verse 10 with me. As an example of suffering and patience, putting those two together, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. So first you've got the farmer who sows his seed and then he waits for God to do his thing. Then you've got the prophets who speak the word and have no clue when it's going to come about. Yet the credibility of the prophet rests on the coming about of his words. Do you get what I'm saying? A prophet speaks, and he's only a true prophet if what he says comes true. If it comes true, then only is he a true prophet. Now, most prophets in the early years, what they said came true much later. 10 years later, 50 years later. Some of them, even till today, some of their prophecies have not yet come true, but they will. So, on what basis does that prophet be patient? How does he hold on? Knowing the fact that just as God has called him to be faithful with what he has told him to say or do, he just does his part and leaves the rest to God. Like the farmer, think about the prophet. So whether suffering or what is the two things he says? Suffering and patience. Think about these two examples. For the farmer, for the prophet. He had to sometimes undergo persecution because he needed to stick with what he has said, what his testimony is. Behold, we consider those blessed, those happy who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have heard of the steadfastness with which he hung in there, and then the purposes of the Lord came through because God's mercy and God's compassion are always there. So you've got the farmers, you've got the prophets, and you've got Job. All of them steadfast. Number one, be patient. Number two, be steadfast. Stick with it, just like the prophets, just like Job. Why should you stick with it? Because if you believe that God has called you to do something or say something, just because it doesn't bear fruit, just because your popularity doesn't hit the charts, just because someone doesn't mark you a 5 stars on it, doesn't mean it's failed. Your definitions of failure and God's definitions of success are so way poles apart. And God deals with things over time, and His faithfulness is over time. And His faithfulness is to generations and generations and generations. So we need to be steadfast. Another word for steadfastness, my principal taught me in Bible college, is stickability. Stickability. How easily we just give up. How easily we grumble, the opposite of being patient. How easily we give up, the opposite of being steadfast. If you don't like the word steadfast, use stickable. Just stick with it. Being consistent, being steadfast means just sticking with what you have been saying, sticking with what you have been doing. My friends, you and I in this generation, we get so bored so easily. We want to get on to newer and better things. We want to think, okay, maybe I didn't do it the right way. Let me try some other way. And we're trying it so many different ways. We don't like one job, we skip to go to the next job. Today, there is no concept of faithfulness in a job. There is no concept of allegiance or long-term loyalty in any job. In fact, the quicker you move jobs, quicker you move to the next rung of the ladder in your career, what you call a career move, people are losing faith in you. They don't know whether they'll have you there tomorrow. So they don't know whether they can depend on you. And how good are you? And who cares how good you are if we don't know, we can't trust if you're going to be there tomorrow. Steadfastness. Another word for steadfastness, stickability. To stick with something even when it gets boring, to stick with something even when it gets to the point where you feel like giving up. Quickly, one last one. Is your yes a yes and is your no a no? Look at verse 12. But above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by anything else. Don't go about establishing your word with an oath, because your word needs to stand on its own. Your word needs to mean what it says. When you say yes, don't say, I swear I'll do it. Just say, I'll do it. And then do it. If you say, I'm not going to do it, I'm not available, I will not be there, then don't be there. Don't change your mind. Don't let your yes be yes, let your no be no. Why? Because consistency is another part of character. Consistency with your words. Oh, we are so quick at saying, yeah, I'll be there, I'll come. Ah, no worry, I'll take care of it. And we know that in our Indian culture, we can just call up the phone and say, I couldn't make it, sorry. Done. But nobody stops to go back to your initial covenant, your commitment. We say, you said you'll come, you said you'll do, you said you'll say this, but now you're going back on your word. You lied. We are too nice to go back to that and say that. So because everyone's nice, we just let it go, let it go, let it go. What we could do is judge ourselves. We can judge ourselves and say, am I being consistent? When I say yes, does it mean yes? When I say no, does it mean no? This is not something I want to preach more to you about. I want you to talk about it. Discuss it within your group. Do you even trust each other? Do your parents trust you? Do you trust your parents? Can you be sure that when someone has said yes, at cost to their personal harm, they will keep their word? Such is the importance and significance of leading the Christian or Christ-centered life. You are consistent, you are steadfast, and you are patient. God bless you.